Hello, I'm here again. It's Aidan, and I want to enlighten you a bit more about the town I live in, about Skerries. And today, I in particular want to tell you how the town was visually shaped by one industry, actually. The industry wouldn't be fishing, which some people might jump to mind. It wouldn't be tourism either. The industry was a hole in the ground that opened up about 150 years ago, just outside Skerries. And that is what has shaped Skerries. Everywhere we look, we can see the stones that were drawn from Milverton Quarry. And those stones will outlive me, they will outlive my children, and they'll outlive their children's children, because that's what you see when you walk around Skerries. Coming in the Skerries Road from Lusk, you pass the blue and yellow roadstone gates on your right before passing under the beautiful stone railway bridge that was built in 1860 from Milverton Quarry. That was shortly after Milverton Quarry started to trade commercially, and you can actually still see the design by architect Maurice Wilkinson of that lovely bridge. I can't establish exactly the date that Milverton Quarry opened, but it must have been sometime around 1850. It would have been quite common for small quarries in the area to actually work on small projects or landfill projects before they opened up commercially. In fact, I came from a farm close by in Carduff, and that had a quarry, and that was the source of the stone that built Carduff Hall, which was my former home. So, and actually it is quite interesting when they were building the M1 later on, and they took aerial, them meaning the road authority, and they took aerial photographs of the area in preparation for everything they had to put into their planning permission. They actually found remnants of an old settlement down beside my quarry along the side of the river. So that wasn't an uncommon thing. But let me just get back then to Milverton. The first recorded that I can find large project that came from Milverton was one from Rockabill Island and from the lighthouse that's out there. Construction began on the island of the lighthouse in 1855 under the supervision of the Burgess brothers, William and James. They were builders from County Limerick. The lighthouse itself was built between 1855 and 1860 with granite from the Mourne Mountains in County Down and local limestone from Milverton Quarry. The total cost of all the buildings and the equipment at the time was £13,248. It sounds, it's not so much. The lighthouse light was placed in the tower on the 4th of July, 1860, in the same year that the railway bridge that I mentioned earlier was erected. It doesn't matter when you come in through that little tunnel, in through the bridge, it doesn't matter which way you turn after you go through that bridge, whether you head for the monument, taking the first exit, or whether you head for Patrick, taking the second exit. But everywhere you look, you'll see stone, you'll see walls, you'll see buildings that were actually built from Milverton stone. And that stone dates back 330 million years, according to people who know a lot better, a lot more than me. So it's seen a lot in its geological life. James Hamilton, the landlord from Skerries, in 1860, when he saw the beautiful bridge that had been built, maybe it turned his mind to recording for posterity what a great man he was, because he decided to build a permanent monument to his memory as the local Skerries landlord. In 1863, the Hamilton Monument was proudly erected at the junction of Thomas Hand Street and Strand Street, long before planners ever thought of using it as a roundabout. The design of the Hamilton Monument was based on a reduced scale replica of the Wellington Monument in the Phoenix Park. That was built in 1861. And Wikipedia records that that monument was 203 feet tall, 62 meters, making it the largest obelisk in Europe. The original plans were to have Wellington mounted on his horse, but unfortunately the funds ran out, so they couldn't put him on the horse, and they just put the obelisk up instead. When the Homepatrick monument was built, there was no danger of the money running out, because the landlord put a tax on all his tenants all over the country, and that's what paid for the monument. And he, to make sure that everyone remembered him, he wrote in 4 different little plaques around the monument. This monument was erected in memory of James Hans Hamilton Esquire, MP, Abbottstown House, County Dublin, by the tenantry of his several estates, viz. Homepatrick, Dublin, Meath, Carlow, Down, and Queen's County, in testimony of their esteem for him as a kind friend and a benevolent landlord. He represented this county in Parliament for 22 years, and he died on the 19th of June in 1863. After the Hamilton Monument, if you turn right onto Strand Street, there's plenty more Milverton stone structures to feast your eyes on. One of the main first ones is the Methodist Church on the right-hand side at the end of the Convent Lane. That was built by Milverton limestone in 1880. The Methodist congregation in Skerries originally met in a small cottage which stood at the entrance to College Court behind the monument. This congregation, they leased out that cottage in April 1852. In 1879, Mr. Robert Carey bought some land on Strand Street, and the present Methodist Church was built. The church was opened for worship on the 4th of June, 1880. A year later, ownership of the church was given to the Methodist trustees. Pass by that fine building, and the next one you'll see is the Carnegie Library. This was built as the hole in the ground along the Skerries Road out in Milverton grew bigger and bigger each year. This was 1911, and there were grants being handed out all over Ireland by the Andrew Carnegie Trust. They financed 66 public libraries in Ireland, and Skerries was lucky enough to be one of the recipients of his generosity. This time, Lord Homepatrick stepped up, and he provided the site in Strand Street. Skerries ended up with a stunning library with a design that was complete with a lovely clock tower. But there's a little story about that too. Not surprisingly, there were applications coming in for free Carnegie grant money from all over Ireland. Malahide drew up very similar plans for their Carnegie Library as the ones for Skerries. Malahide's proposal for a clock tower was properly submitted and duly rejected by Carnegie's secretary. Skerries obviously took a different approach. They drew up the plans. A local man, Willie Duff, gave a quote, the best quote, and he got James Duff, and he got the quote for the contract. The local Milverton owner, William Flanagan, supplied the cut stone. Nobody submitted the final plans to the Carnegie Library. They just got on with the job. And before Carnegie could object to the tower there, the thing was finished and everything was done. And that's how we got our beautiful library. And Malahide, it just wasn't quite as exciting. There's an even stranger story, actually. There's 2 versions of it. One is by Brendan Grimes from the Historical Society, who said that the actual clock in the Carnegie Library wasn't finally installed until 2011, 100 years later. Another version I've heard is that the contents of the tower had to be replaced in around 2011, and that there was still the possibility to apply to the Carnegie Trust, who came up with the funds to actually instate or reinstate the clock or whatever it was in the tower. One way or another, the original building for the Carnegie Library in 1911 cost the grand sum of €1,000. Now, I want to step back a little bit here and recall that Rockabill that was mentioned, that wasn't the only island that needed Milverton stone. Just before the Carnegie Library was built, Milverton Quarry was approached by the new owners of Lamb Bay Island with a new and a very exciting project. In 1903, Cecil Baring, later the third Baron Revelstoke and owner of Baring's Bank, and his beautiful young wife, Maud Lorillard, saw an advert in the Field magazine for an island in the Irish Sea that was for sale. In early 1904, Maud, who was heavily pregnant at the time, and Cecil went to investigate Lamb Bay. They found a small line of cottages occupied by coast guards, a chapel, a walled garden, a dilapidated castle, and a magnificent wealth of wildlife. Both of them fell in love with the island immediately, and by the 1st of April 1904, Lamb Bay was theirs for the princely sum of €5,250. It was less than half the cost of building the actual lighthouse on Rockabill. So the first tasks that faced the Barings was the repair of the castle. Everything was fairly run down and dilapidated. First thing they needed was a heavy lugger, the Shamrock, and that was used to carry materials out to the island from Rush. The Shamrock version 3 is still in use today as Lamb Bay's main cargo boat, and it's used to bring over the sheep and the cattle, as well as bulkier materials and equipment. And remember, there's no electricity on the island. Everything has to be generated. So there's quite a lot of toing and froing. By 1905, the new owners were ready to make major improvements to the rundown castle. Besides refurbishing the castle, they added on a new wing and an extensive range of garden walls. So they turned to Milverton for help. Milverton at the time could offer copious quantities of a cool blue-grey limestone that was skillfully wrought by the local quarrymen. And at the time, Milverton employed about 40 stone cutters. I actually found after the Milverton work was completed, there was a lovely letter actually sent by Cecil Baring to Mr. Weldon. There's a lane, a local lane here, Weldon's Lane, named after him. And Mr. Weldon got a letter on the 7th of December, 1911. And it said, "Dear Mr. Weldon, as the work at Lamb Bay has now drawn to its successful conclusion, I wish to offer you my congratulations on the outcome and my best thanks for the share which the Milverton Quarries have had in the work. I have no doubt that generations to come will admire the skill, the strength and the patience of which the windows and staircases of Lamb Bay are ocular evidence. I enclose a cheque for £5, which sum I shall be obliged if you divide up among the stone cutters and their workers, their names are unknown to me, to whom I am indebted for this happy result. And I beg that you will at the same time tell them that I appreciate most highly what they have done for us. Matthews, the man who came over to the island, will be taken care of by a special gift of £1, which I have asked Carter to let him have. Yours faithfully, Cecil Baring." So that was the story of Lamb Bay. But now, back to Strand Street. We left it at the Carnegie Library. Let's move on to the next building, which is the Catholic Church. That was built in 1936. It replaced an earlier church that was on the other side of Church Street, and that was dating back to 1832. The belfry, which was added to the original church in 1834 was actually retained. The Matthews family of Skerries, they built the belfry from local Milverton limestone, and it acts as a bell tower for the present church. The building of the Catholic Church was commenced, St. Patrick's Church was commenced in 1935. They had to knock 20-foot piles down into the ground so as to give it sufficient strength to support the building. The sand of Skerries was not the strongest substance to be building large buildings on. There was at the time a local member of a Skerries family called Albert Power. Albert was one of the foremost sculptors in Ireland at the time, and he was commissioned to do a sculpture to put on the front of the Catholic Church. He came up with a design which actually had St. Patrick standing on top of a goat. Might have sounded clever to him, but the locals weren't that impressed with the depiction of their patron saint standing on the Skerries goat that they were reputed to have eaten. So they objected to it. And the final sculpture that you can still see on the front of the church has St. Patrick standing on an Irish scroll. That was acceptable. And quietly, sometime later on, there was a little plaque put up, I believe, of a goat, or a goat's head. It was added to the church, but we probably have said enough about that little story for the moment. I could have, by the way, instead of turning right into Strand Street, I could have turned left and headed down for the harbour, because, you know, everywhere, and I mean everywhere you look there, you can see the remnants, what has been left by Milverton Quarry too. And actually, I can go back to Hugh Ryan again, and he said it much better than I ever could. He said, I could have seen that beautiful wall all along the sea up to the harbour. The library, the belfry, St. Patrick Church, the railway bridges, the harbour, the monument, and the sea walls were all hewn from this great hole in the ground. Tombstones were carved from it. Old field walls were their rough-dressed battlements, cut and blasted from the quarry. The roads were paved with crushed limestone. The cottages were whitewashed with it. The fields were spread with lime. It's in our bones. That pretty well sums up, everywhere you look in Skerries, what you can see, the legacy that was Milverton stone, Milverton limestone. But I want to take you just to one more magical place that Milverton made. Go on up to the end of Strand Street. Go on up past St. Patrick. If you look to your left, there's some lovely walls along it that were belonging to it as well. Walk past the ghost of the Holy Faith Convent, which is long gone. Go past the lovely old malting house and turn right into Miller's Lane, and you'll finally reach St. Patrick Church. Now, walk around the church or stroll through the graveyard to the rear. Milverton Quarry is part of everything you're looking at, from the church to the walls and even to the gravestones. Skerries Historical Society wrote about this wonderful church in 2002. They wrote, nearby is the new Protestant church, a picturesque building in Gothic style. Its graceful spire is particularly attractive in distant views of the town. The church was built in 1867 and it replaced the old church, whose tower is still in the graveyard. The following extract describing the church appeared in the Irish Builder on the 15th of September, 1868. The new parish church of St. Patrick near Skerries, Dublin, was consecrated on the 2nd instance by the Archbishop of Dublin. It is in the Gothic style, and although very plain in appearance, it forms a marked feature in the landscape from whatever side it may be viewed. The material is limestone from Milverton Quarry. So with that, I just want to say thank you to Milverton, for everything you left us, and for making Skerries the unique little town that it is now and that it will remain. Okay, so that's one more story about Skerries, and I think it's a fascinating one. And remember, we want to hear your memories. I've already got some extra things from when I first talked about this. I got that wonderful letter that came from Lambay. So I want you to contact us and let us know anything you can add to the story. Thanks for listening. We really hope that you can keep in touch with us, and we'll be back again soon.